where Thomas Markle is still rehabilitating, having begged his daughter publicly for a visit or a phone call. What possible excuse could these two have?
The world believed Meghan Markle was preparing to enter the British royal family with excitement, hope, and complete devotion. But behind the carefully managed smiles, Thomas Markle claims his daughter had already reached a private conclusion, one so consequential that it could eventually force Prince Harry to choose between love and the crown. To the public, the approaching wedding looked like the beginning of a modern royal fairy tale. Meghan appeared confident, Harry appeared devoted, and the monarchy seemed ready to welcome a woman who represented change. Yet beneath that celebration, a quieter tension was allegedly taking shape. Meghan was not simply preparing for a ceremony. She was studying the institution she was about to enter, watching its rules, measuring its expectations, and trying to understand what might be demanded from her once the applause ended. Thomas Markle stood far outside that protected world. He was connected by blood, but increasingly separated by distance, confusion, and strained communication. He watched his daughter's transformation through scattered conversations and public reports, sensing that something in her voice had begun to change. She still spoke about Harry, love, and the future. But other questions had entered the conversation. Harder questions. What would happen if palace advisors tried to control her choices? How much of her old life would survive? Would royal protection also mean royal permission? Those concerns carried enormous weight because Meghan was entering a hierarchy built over centuries. Rank shaped every interaction. Tradition governed every role. Duty was praised, but obedience was often expected without being openly named. Every privilege came with a boundary, and every warm public welcome allegedly concealed another rule she had not yet been shown. She began to understand that marrying Harry and marrying the monarchy were not the same commitment. Harry could offer love, loyalty, and private reassurance. The institution demanded something colder: discipline, silence, patience, and the ability to surrender control without appearing wounded by the loss. That was the first warning sign. Meghan reportedly became focused on what she would still be allowed to keep after the wedding. Her voice, professional ambitions, friendships, independence, and the identity she had built before royalty entered her life. These were not small concerns. They went to the center of who she believed herself to be. Harry tried to calm those fears. He believed the monarchy could change. He believed they could modernize it together, challenge old habits, and create a different kind of royal future. But his confidence may have hidden a dangerous misunderstanding. Harry had grown up inside the system. Meghan was approaching it from the outside, where its walls looked higher and its promises far less certain. She was not only afraid that she might fail as a royal, she was allegedly beginning to fear something more painful: that she might succeed only by becoming silent, controlled, and unrecognizable to herself. And as the wedding approached, the questions Meghan was asking became more specific, more urgent, and far more dangerous, because they were no longer about fitting into royal life, but about surviving it. Royal brides were expected to learn the rules, accept the hierarchy, and trust the palace to protect them. Meghan allegedly did something far more unsettling. She examined every promise for its hidden cost, questioned traditions no one else dared challenge, and began testing whether Harry's loyalty belonged to the institution or to her. As the wedding drew closer, palace life stopped feeling like a distant idea and became a system surrounding every part of Meghan's future. There were security briefings, communication rules, tightly controlled schedules, and layers of approval she had never experienced before. Nothing appeared entirely private. Every announcement passed through someone. Every journey required permission. Every interview carried consequences. Even the smallest decision seemed to lead upward through an invisible chain of authority. To those raised inside the monarchy, this was simply how royal life functioned. To Meghan, it felt more personal. She began to understand that the palace would not merely organize her duties. It could influence whom she trusted, when she spoke, where she traveled, and how the public understood her. Her identity could be shaped before she had been given the chance to define it for herself. That fear deepened when questions arose about her professional ambitions. Was she expected to abandon them forever, or only place them on hold while she adjusted to royal responsibility? No answers seemed completely clear. And that uncertainty mattered. A temporary sacrifice could quietly become permanent. A pause could become an ending. Harry found himself caught between two emotional worlds. To the palace, compromise was honorable. It meant duty, patience, and respect for something larger than the individual. But to Meghan, compromise increasingly sounded like surrender. Harry tried to reassure her, explaining that traditions could soften and that change was possible. Yet every promise he made created an expectation he might not have had the power to fulfill. Then came the question of the press. Meghan allegedly wanted to know what would happen if hostile stories appeared and the palace refused to challenge them. The answer was cautious. Royal dignity, she was told, often required silence. Endurance was considered strength. But Meghan did not see silence that way. Silence could protect the crown while leaving her exposed. It could allow accusations to harden into public truth while she remained unable to defend herself. According to Thomas Markle's interpretation, this was when Meghan began forming a private boundary. She would respect tradition only while she believed the institution was protecting her dignity, marriage, and future. The boundary was never formally declared. It existed in private doubts, quiet conditions, and one question she allegedly asked Harry. If the palace ever forced him to choose, where would his loyalty truly lie? That unanswered question followed them into the final wedding preparations, where a family crisis, intense public scrutiny, and palace intervention would turn Meghan's private doubts into something much closer to a permanent decision. Days before the wedding, the celebration fractured. Thomas Markle's absence became an international spectacle. Private pain turned into public controversy, and the palace moved rapidly to control the damage. But according to Thomas, the crisis taught Meghan a lesson she would never forget. Royal protection always came with royal authority. What had begun as a deeply personal family problem was suddenly no longer private. Every conversation carried public consequences. Every hesitation threatened to become another headline. Meghan was not only dealing with the possibility that her father would miss one of the most important days of her life, she was watching that pain become part of a larger royal emergency. The emotions were brutal. Humiliation, anger, disappointment, grief. She was preparing to stand before the world while the relationship with her father seemed to be collapsing in full public view. Yet, the monarchy could not pause to absorb that pain. The ceremony had to continue. Guests had been invited, security plans were fixed, and the image of royal stability had to be preserved. Palace officials allegedly moved with cold efficiency. Their priority was continuity. The wedding could not appear disorganized, uncertain, or wounded. Meghan's feelings mattered, but the institution demanded an immediate solution. To Thomas, this was the moment his daughter began to understand how quickly private relationships could be absorbed into palace strategy. She was also being judged from every direction. The press questioned her family. Courtiers feared further embarrassment. Advisors examined every statement for risk. Even relatives became part of the growing storm. Meghan may have felt that she was being asked to carry the shame of a crisis she could not fully control while remaining calm enough to protect the royal celebration. Harry's frustration intensified. He allegedly believed relentless coverage had turned confusion into disaster. His instinct was to defend Meghan, but the palace response remained cautious and controlled. To Meghan, that restraint may have felt like abandonment. The institution could protect the ceremony, But could it protect her? When King Charles agreed to walk Meghan partway down the aisle, the gesture appeared compassionate. It gave her support when her own father could not be present. Yet beneath that kindness was another powerful message. When her private family failed, the crown could step into the empty space. That moment may have changed Meghan's dependence on Harry completely. If the palace would not defend her in the way she needed, then Harry would have to become more than a husband. He would have to become her shield, her advocate, and the final guarantee that she would not be left alone inside the system. According to Thomas, Meghan no longer viewed the wedding as proof that she had been accepted. She began to see it as the opening of a test. The smiles, titles, and public celebration would mean nothing unless the monarchy proved it could protect the woman behind them. But before that test could begin, Meghan allegedly needed one promise from Harry, a promise that sounded like devotion in the moment, yet carried consequences capable of shaking the monarchy itself. Before the music, the carriage, and the vows witnessed by millions, another commitment was allegedly made in private. Thomas Markle claims Meghan needed to know that if royal duty ever became incompatible with their marriage, Harry would not retreat behind protocol, and his answer may have changed the future of the monarchy. In the final days before the wedding, Meghan allegedly pushed Harry toward a question neither of them could safely ignore. What would happen if palace expectations stopped being inconvenient and became destructive? What if the institution demanded silence while their marriage was under pressure? And what if Harry was eventually forced to choose between the role he had inherited and the woman he had promised to protect? For Meghan, the fear was not abstract. Harry's loyalty had been shaped long before she entered his life. The monarchy had raised him, disciplined him, and taught him that sacrifice was not optional. Duty was woven into his identity. He loved Meghan deeply, but the crown had defined what love, loyalty, and endurance were supposed to look like. Harry carried his own private fear. He remembered what relentless pressure had done to Princess Diana. He remembered the loneliness, the scrutiny, and the feeling that the institution could demand composure even while a person was breaking inside. He allegedly believed he could stop that history from repeating itself, but belief was not enough. Meghan needed certainty. Would he defend her if palace advisors demanded silence? Would he challenge a decision that protected the royal image while leaving her emotionally exposed? Would he still stand beside her if doing so placed him against the very system that had shaped his life? Harry's answer was deeply personal. Their marriage would come first. He would not allow the monarchy to destroy what they had built. In that moment, the promise may have sounded like the natural language of devotion, something said by a man determined to calm the woman he loved. But Meghan allegedly heard something more permanent. She heard a guarantee. Before the wedding, such a promise seemed almost harmless. Neither of them expected the conflict to arrive so quickly or become so severe. Harry may have believed duty and love could always be balanced, that the palace would adapt, and that no final choice would ever be required. The palace, however, was operating under the opposite assumption. Marriage was expected to pull Harry closer to royal responsibility, not carry him away from it. Meghan was entering his world. She was expected to accept its discipline, support his inherited role, and understand that personal wishes could never outrank the institution. That was the hidden contradiction at the center of the celebration. Meghan allegedly entered the marriage believing Harry had promised to choose their relationship if the conflict became impossible. The palace entered it believing Meghan had accepted royal authority without conditions. Both sides believed the arrangement was understood. It was not. The wedding united two people while concealing two completely different definitions of loyalty, and Thomas Markle claimed Meghan had already decided what she would do when those definitions finally collided. And it was inside that contradiction between the palace's expectations and Harry's private promise that Meghan allegedly made the hidden decision Thomas Markle would later describe as the true beginning of the royal rupture. Thomas Markle's revelation changes the meaning of everything that followed. He claims Meghan had privately decided before the royal wedding that she would enter the monarchy, but she would never surrender the right to leave it, and if the palace forced an impossible choice, Harry would be expected to leave beside her. This, according to Thomas, was the decision hidden beneath the celebration. Meghan would give royal life a chance. She would perform the duties, respect the traditions, and attempt to build a meaningful place inside the institution. But she would not allow marriage to become a lifetime sentence to royal control. Somewhere beneath the promises, titles, and public excitement, she allegedly preserved an exit route. It was not, Thomas suggested, an immediate plan to abandon Britain. Meghan was not supposedly entering the wedding while secretly preparing a departure. The decision was more personal than that. It was a condition. If palace life threatened her identity, damaged her marriage, or placed her future family inside a system she no longer trusted, she would refuse to remain trapped simply because tradition demanded endurance. Thomas believed this instinct came from the daughter he had always known. Meghan had built her adult life around choice, ambition, and control over her own direction. Entering the monarchy did not erase that need for personal agency. It made it more urgent. But such a condition could never be spoken publicly. Any sign of hesitation before the wedding might have caused a storm powerful enough to threaten the ceremony itself. Questions would have been raised about her commitment, Harry's judgment, and whether a future senior royal was already placing limits on her duty before it had even begun. So the decision remained private, protected by Harry's alleged promise. Meghan believed she would not face the institution alone. If royal pressure became unbearable, Harry had already assured her that their marriage would come first. To Meghan, that may have felt like self-preservation. To palace traditionalists, it would have looked like something far more dangerous. A refusal to accept that royal service was permanent. From that moment, every disagreement carried a second meaning. A hostile story was no longer only a headline. A dispute over staff was not merely administrative. Questions about security, money, titles, public statements, and independence became evidence in a private test. Had the palace crossed the line Meghan had established before the vows, Harry may never have understood how seriously his reassurance would be remembered. Words offered to comfort the woman he loved were allegedly transformed into a binding emotional promise. And when the moment of choice arrived, those words would become the foundation of a decision that changed his relationship with his family, his country, and the crown. The greater danger was what happened when palace advisors began to recognize the pattern. Meghan was not simply seeking more influence within royal life. She was protecting the freedom to build a future beyond it. The decision remained invisible at first. Concealed beneath royal engagements and carefully controlled smiles, but as Meghan's private boundary collided with palace authority, the monarchy began to sense that Harry's loyalty was shifting in a way it could no longer ignore. At first, palace officials believed Meghan's confidence could be guided, her ambition redirected, and her frustrations absorbed by tradition. Then, the pattern changed. Questions became resistance, resistance became confrontation, and courtiers allegedly realized they were not managing an adjustment period, they were witnessing a struggle over who controlled Harry's future. In the beginning, Meghan appeared to offer exactly what the monarchy needed. She was confident, articulate, and able to connect with audiences far beyond the palace walls. Her international appeal suggested a more modern royal future, one that could speak to younger generations and reach people who had never felt represented by the crown. For a brief moment, change seemed possible. But the disagreement was never simply about whether the monarchy should evolve. It was about who controlled the pace, the message, and the limits of that evolution. Meghan allegedly wanted visible results. Palace officials preferred careful adjustments that protected hierarchy and ensured no individual became larger than the institution itself. The conflict became sharper when criticism intensified. Meghan wanted forceful responses and public correction. The palace relied on silence, selective engagement, and relationships with the press built over decades. To courtiers, restraint protected royal dignity. To Meghan, it allowed damaging stories to grow while she remained unable to defend herself. Soon, even household disputes carried deeper meaning. Staffing changes, schedules, appearances, and administrative arrangements were no longer minor disagreements. They became battles over independence. Each decision raised the same question. Was Meghan shaping her role, or was the palace shaping it for her? Harry's reaction became increasingly emotional. Every slight against Meghan touched an older wound. He remembered the pressure surrounding his mother and feared that the same machinery was turning against his wife. His protectiveness hardened, and palace figures allegedly began to see it as proof that Meghan was pulling him away from William, his responsibilities, and the discipline expected of a senior royal. Two competing futures were taking shape. William represented patience, continuity, and loyalty to the institution, even when that loyalty demanded personal sacrifice. Harry and Meghan increasingly represented something else: freedom, emotional truth, and the right to reject inherited expectations when they became unbearable. Meghan, meanwhile, was allegedly measuring each disappointment against the boundary she had created before the wedding. She was no longer asking whether royal life was difficult. She was asking whether the palace had finally crossed the line. The monarchy tried to contain the tension without admitting how serious it had become. Separate offices, revised duties, private negotiations, and controlled announcements created an appearance of stability. Behind that appearance, trust was collapsing. And the coming confrontation would not remain a disagreement over personalities. It would expand into a battle over where Harry and Meghan could live, how they would earn money, whether security would follow them, how they could use their titles, and whether a prince could step partly outside the monarchy while keeping the privileges of belonging to it. Once the palace understood that Meghan might truly act on her hidden decision, every compromise became a calculation, and the next proposal from Harry and Meghan would expose just how far apart the two sides had become. The private promise made before the wedding could no longer remain theoretical. Harry now faced the choice Meghan had allegedly warned him about: remain fully bound to the institution that shaped his life, or protect the marriage he believed the institution was failing to understand. There would be no painless answer. By then, Harry was being pulled apart by loyalties that could no longer exist peacefully. He still felt the weight of duty, family, and history. The monarchy had given him identity, purpose, and a place in a story larger than himself. Yet he also saw Meghan struggling, and he feared their child could one day be exposed to the same pressures that had marked his own childhood. For Meghan, the line had already been crossed. Hostile headlines kept coming. Palace silence felt unbearable. Internal disputes deepened, while the independence she believed marriage would preserve seemed to narrow with every new restriction. She no longer trusted that patience would produce change. In her mind, the system was not slowly improving, it was slowly closing around them. Their answer was not complete separation, at least not at first. Harry and Meghan allegedly imagined a reshaped royal role, one that would allow them greater freedom, financial independence, international movement, and the ability to support the crown without remaining trapped inside its daily machinery. To them, the proposal felt practical. They believed they could continue serving the monarchy while escaping the structure that had caused so much unhappiness. They were not asking to erase Harry's heritage. They were asking to redefine it. But the palace saw a dangerous contradiction. Royal status could not become a flexible identity used when convenient and set aside when restrictive. Duty, from the institution's perspective, could not be divided according to personal preference without weakening the entire structure. William may have seen an even greater threat. If Harry could retain titles, influence, security, and commercial freedom while stepping away from full service, what would stop future royals from demanding the same arrangement? The issue was no longer only Harry and Meghan. It was precedent. Harry grew increasingly resentful. He believed the palace was debating rules while his marriage was approaching collapse. Every institutional argument sounded to him like another refusal to hear the emotional warning he had been giving for months. And this was the moment Thomas Markle claimed Meghan had anticipated before the wedding. The palace was demanding compliance. Meghan was asking Harry to remember his promise. Harry chose to step back, not necessarily because he hated his family or rejected everything royal, but because he believed remaining still would mean abandoning his wife when she needed him most. In his mind, leaving became an act of protection. Yet the decision did not end the conflict. It made it larger. What had once been a private struggle now became a global battle over truth, loyalty, money, memory, victimhood, and ownership of the royal story. Harry had honored the promise Meghan believed he made before their wedding, but beyond the palace gates, they would discover that escaping royal control did not mean escaping royal consequences. Meghan's alleged decision secured her freedom, but freedom came wrapped in exile, fractured relationships, and permanent suspicion. Harry escaped the role that constrained him, yet lost the family structure that defined him. And inside the palace, one question remains unspoken. Was the rupture inevitable before the marriage even began? Beyond royal life, Meghan gained the distance she had allegedly believed might one day become necessary. Palace advisors no longer controlled her daily role, and ancient expectations no longer defined every decision. But that freedom carried a heavy cost. Harry found himself separated from relatives, military connections, royal responsibilities, and the identity that had shaped him since birth. He had protected his marriage, yet the life he once believed permanent was suddenly behind him. The monarchy responded with discipline. Formal language presented the separation as an institutional adjustment, something that could be organized through revised duties, titles, and arrangements. But beneath that controlled response was something far more painful. Trust had collapsed. The palace had lost a working prince. Harry had lost his place within the royal structure, and the family had lost the ability to contain its conflict privately. Meghan's hidden decision could now be interpreted in completely different ways. Supporters might see courage, a woman refusing to sacrifice her emotional survival merely to satisfy tradition. Critics might see confirmation that she had never intended to accept royal duty without conditions. The same choice could appear either brave or calculating, depending on who controlled the story. Thomas Markle's role made that story even more tragic. His revelation offered a possible explanation for Meghan's actions, but it also turned an alleged private intention into public ammunition. Whatever truth existed between father and daughter became buried beneath accusation, distance, and bitterness. And Harry's promise carried consequences he may never have imagined. What began as reassurance before the wedding eventually demanded the surrender of almost everything familiar. While Harry chose personal freedom, William remained tied to a different destiny: succession, restraint, and the belief that private suffering must never weaken the crown. The monarchy survived the departure, but survival did not erase the damage. The institution appeared strong enough to continue, yet powerless to prevent the family beneath it from breaking apart. Perhaps the wedding's most important moment never occurred during the vows. Perhaps it happened privately, when Meghan allegedly decided that no title, palace, or tradition would ever become more powerful than her right to choose her future. There was no clean victory. Meghan protected her boundary. Harry proved his loyalty. The crown preserved its rules. but every side paid with relationships that may never fully recover. And one question remains. Had Meghan revealed the decision before the wedding, would Harry still have entered the chapel knowing he might eventually have to leave everything outside it? Because the ceremony millions remember as the beginning of a royal fairy tale may actually have marked the opening chapter of a separation already waiting in the shadows, and the full consequences of that hidden decision are still unfolding.